know what you want, what your investment criteria and goals are. Know why, because that why will pull you up during tough times and propel you further during great times. And once you know that, is take action. Keep in mind that things may not happen overnight. They might, but in most cases, it does take some time. Real estate is a long-term game. Things don't happen overnight, but don't give up. Just be persistent, consistent, follow that path, and success will inevitably follow.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further.
Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I am your host, as always, Yona Weiss on this show, and excited to be here with another great guest we have on the show for you today, Vessi Kapoulian. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Thank you so much, Yona. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to our conversation. Thanks again for having me.
It's a pleasure. We've became acquainted a couple of years ago with the pandemic, and everyone was, working remotely, and everyone was doing lots of Zoom calls. And obviously we had our weekly Zoom meetup, which you attended quite frequently. It was just great to get to know you through that and so many other great real estate investors. And you have, I wouldn't say a unique story, because nowadays a lot of people are doing what you're doing, but it is something that is always fascinating to me, how someone who has a career, in banking, in the finance world, whatever, and then finds real estate as an alternative, a way to, invest and build wealth. And not only are you doing that, but you're teaching others and helping others to do the same. So it's just great to have someone like you on the show. I would love for you to give a little background, maybe, how you got started, or what is your background exactly? I know I mentioned you were in banking and finance, but what does it actually mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to share. Banking and finance is what I do as a career. For my W-2 job, I focus on underwriting complex international clients. So the more complex and the more international they are, they come to me to underwrite and figure out a solution that works both for the lender, for the bank, as well as for the customer. And always enjoyed the analytical side of things, but also the relationship side and working with people and building those relationships. So I find a good balance in my role. But as far as real estate is concerned, I started that journey back in 2017. Like most people, I started in the residential space. And since I reside in Los Angeles, California, finding a property here wasn't as easy, because my goals at the time, and still are, cash flow, number one, and two, investing in a place that is landlord friendly or business friendly. And naturally, by virtue of these criteria, that tailored my path towards investing out of state. And I remember it was a nerve-wracking decision, but I'm so glad, looking back, so glad that I started. And I wish I had started sooner. And I think a lot of people say that, but taking that first step was critical, because it showed me that it's possible. It showed me that it could work. And then one property led to another. The light bulb went on, and I thought, well, that could be something bigger, not just a small retirement nest egg to diversify away from the stock market. And that's when I made the decision to transition into multifamily in order to scale more and fast track that process. I went down a rabbit hole of learning a lot about multifamily, and a lot of successful people at the time, and still do, advise others as they get started to be in a circle of like-minded individuals, but also find a mentor, a coach. And I decided to go down that path, join the mastermind, which I think vastly accelerated my journey. And as a result, was able to successfully complete that transition by purchasing 2 multifamily properties, 1 joint venture, and shortly after 1 syndication, and continuing to scale from here.
That's awesome. So you talk a lot about finding your first property. I know a lot of people get started in residential and then transition into multifamily. And you came across that through, as you mentioned, some podcasts and some mentoring and things like that. But I'm just curious, going back to those early days back in 2017, when you bought your first property out of state, what was that experience like for you, man? How did that go for you? I'm just curious. Is it something you still have to this day, or did you buy more, continue that path?
Yes, it was nerve-wracking because I think we're always taught find a property within a 5-mile or 1-hour drive radius of where you live. So I definitely had to fight that stereotype in my own little mind at the time that it's actually possible to invest long distance as long as you have the right team in place. And I am a more analytical person, one could argue, but I also like to be balanced and take action. So at the time, there was one particular meetup that was happening in LA, mostly virtually. So I was listening to those presentations. And one day I just picked up the phone and called one of the presenters who was more consistent in organizing those meetups. And I asked him, hey, do you have any properties that you sell or know someone who does? And sure enough, he did. So of course, I did my research on the market. I didn't just blindly jump in, but I didn't go through a very lengthy scientific process of which of the 52 states do I pick? And within those states, which city do I center in? I really knew my criteria as far as location and just action and dove right in. I would call it semi-turnkey property, fully vacant. So it did take a little bit longer to stabilize and find a tenant, but it's done really well for me in terms of cash flow per door.
That's great.
Per month. And it ultimately led me to buy another and another. So I have a couple of residential properties before I formally scaled into multifamily.
Very cool. And where are those located, if you don't mind me asking?
No, not at all. So Memphis, Tennessee is one of my markets, and then Central Florida is the other one where I have a small portfolio.
Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, Memphis can be challenging. There's a lot of one of the most crime-ridden cities in the country.
It can be very challenging, and that's why doing your diligence upfront makes a lot of difference, not just for Memphis, I would say for any property. Sure. So I very carefully diligence the neighborhood in terms of crime rate, median household income, poverty rate. For that very first property, I actually flew to Memphis. I had been there before, so I had some familiarity with the city, but I still flew to see and check out the neighborhood. So I think doing that diligence up front has helped shape my experience to be a positive one. But yes, Memphis can be very street by street, even within the same zip code. So if you're not careful, you could find yourself in the wrong corner.
That's so true. Very difficult. I actually remember when I was first getting started in real estate, someone had brought me a deal, and they actually, a very successful guy, had a portfolio of over about 300 doors in Memphis. And that was surprising to me because, I had heard about Memphis being such a tough area. And he brought me a deal, like a multifamily property that he wanted to, bring me on as a partner. And, we had met a few times, really great guy, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it. It was like, you realize that this property is like almost completely vacant. It was a multifamily property. It was like 70 units or something. And I was blown away. Like, how do you have, and he assured me he had the manpower, he had the team in place to, do the renovations, all that stuff. But still, it was like, okay, every time I try to learn about the area and turn on the news, try to check, it's like, okay, there's just like a shooting right down the street over here. Like, I couldn't make sense of it. But, thankfully, there are people that are successful and figure out ways to capitalize in their specific areas. So, more power to them. That's awesome. I want to dig a little deeper in the mentorship and the partnerships that you've been able to find and create over the past couple of years, because that's something I find is what accelerates the growth of people more than anything else. Now, you're still working, you're full-time W-2 and still investing out of state in, the multifamily, and you're able to do that with partners. Is this something that you could see yourself doing on your own? Or is this, do you see it as, no, this is the only way to really do this at this point is with partners?
Well, I will start by saying with multifamily, right, involves buying large apartment buildings. And just by virtue of that, and I say large, it could be anything, right, from 5 units to 500, 1,000 units, a lot, right? So just by virtue of the unit count, there's a lot more complexity involved and a lot more work. And especially working full time, or even if you're not, at some point of time, if you want to scale, you really need that additional support or manpower. But beyond that, the acquisition and management process of multifamily entails a variety of skills. I like to call them the 3 A's, which is acquiring the asset, and that's finding the deal, underwriting the deal, attracting capital, and asset management, or effectively executing on the business plan. And each of those requires a unique skill set. So partnering with others who have that complementary skill set and forming that team really holds itself well for successful execution of that business plan and achieving that investment objective. And last but not least, I do find that with teamwork, when you hit rough waters, you have other people that you can lean into. And conversely, when you achieve big milestones and points of success, you have more people to celebrate it. So it amplifies the joy. So around the complexity, the skill set, and just the general teamwork and support, I think it makes a lot more sense to partner up with others. And that's the path I've chosen and intend to follow.
That makes sense. Obviously, everyone has their skill sets and things that they're best at and can contribute to others. And your ability of, the underwriting and asset management side of things, obviously, is something that is a skill set that you've built over your career. I mean, you talked about doing complex international underwriting of different, loan products and things like that. Now, just to clarify, you're not in the real estate lending space per se. Here we talk about like a commercial lender, but there are so many different types of loan products out there for businesses. And it's just amazing that, when you think about anyone who's been in the real estate space, when you think about like lenders, like, oh, you work for, a huge bank, you must be able to help me with my commercial mortgage, right? I mean, do you get that a lot?
I do. And for a lot of people, right, that's what they know. They know the branch. So they ask me, oh, which branch do you work with? I'm like, yeah, I'm on the commercial side. So I work in an office, and mortgage is what most people relate to. But there's such a variety and diversity within commercial lending or lending in general. So no, I don't work with commercial real estate loans today. At one point of time, I did. And that experience has definitely been helpful as I made that decision to expand my portfolio. But today I don't.
I mean, what are some of the skill sets that you have been able to pull from that job that help you in your actual running of multifamily properties?
A couple, actually. Of course, on the diligence side, that is one. And not only the underwriting of the property and analyzing the asset, the performance, the projections, which the lenders would have to do because they too are putting their capital behind it. But also on the diligence side and understanding the various reports that go into that process, why they're important, what are some alternatives, mitigates. And on the asset management side as well, I would say, even though there are differences between residential and multifamily, I've been able to leverage a lot of my skill set from building and growing my small residential portfolio and managing the manager. I really made an effort to run those little properties as a business. And I think that really translated itself well when I decided to make the transition into multifamily.
Sure. And going forward, I mean, you're focused on multifamily going forward, or is there other asset classes that you're interested in?
So that's a great question. As far as active investing, yes, I would like to remain focused on multifamily. I do like to build different income streams. And since my residential portfolio is performing, at least for now, I intend to keep it. If I come across other residential properties that I like, I won't necessarily pass them over. Again, ultimately, I'd like to build those diverse income streams. I also invest passively, and my passive investments are a way to diversify further. into other asset classes outside of residential and multifamily. So I would say multifamily, yes, remains the primary focus, but I'm looking to build those additional income streams as well.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, listen, there's using, your income or your wealth or your money, whatever you want to call it, to create more money and multiple income streams, diversify that as much as possible, makes sense. But when you're actually running a business, you have to really be laser focused on one specific type. And I know you're in the Southeast. I think that's the majority of most people's target areas. But, what do you see right now, the market has just been crazy. It's very difficult to find deals. And even those deals that you are able to find sometimes are hard to manage. And, there are people that unfortunately are defaulting and things like that. It's a tough time right now. Are you experiencing that as well? And what are you doing about that?
It's definitely gotten more challenging. I thought getting into the market in the last year or two was challenging because of competition. Now I think we have a different set of challenges where it feels like sellers and buyers are staring at each other, looking to see who will blink first. And there's a lot of price discovery happening in the market because interest rates increased very rapidly. Cap rates and valuation expectations haven't adjusted as quickly. On top of that, for certain markets, Florida being my core market, and I think Texas is experiencing similar challenges, insurance premiums have gone through the roof. I don't think anyone could have forecasted Hurricane Ian. I don't think anyone could have forecasted the result of it. But in my market specifically, insurance is also unfortunately killing a lot of deals because $200, $300, $500 per door variance could make or break a deal. And it's rapidly evolving currently. When I do find deals, I'm checking with brokers at multiple time points during the process because those are changing. And you don't want to have surprises, but at the minimum, you want to minimize those surprises during the process. So that's the biggest challenge. There is deal flow, there are deals out there, but just getting those to pencil in and at the same time meet the investor return requirements, that's been challenging. But just like anything, real estate goes through cycles, and I remain optimistic in the long run of the benefits of real estate and remaining focused and just keeping at it. And at some point of time, I know the right deal will come along and will pencil in.
Sure.
And I recall even my journey with finding the first deal. I had to underwrite nearly 200 properties to find the one. And that required a lot of persistence. And it wasn't easy at the time because you either have to decline it and say no to brokers. You have to keep cheering yourself. Don't worry, the one will come along. And it eventually came along. So I think it's like a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you just have to keep at it. Be consistent, stay the course, stay true to your investment goals and criteria and those of your investors, and eventually the right asset will come along.
Are you, obviously this is a loaded question, but you're still working full time, right? It's a W-2 and doing this like a side hustle, which to me, it's both could be full-time jobs, right? So I'm just curious, like how you're able to balance that. And do you see at a certain time, or at what point in time you actually do want to retire from the W-2 and go full-time into real estate? Or is, it's just going to continue? You have a good thing going.
Yeah, I enjoy my W-2. I will say in the long run, I do see myself doing the real estate investing business as a full-time venture. It does require a lot of time blocking and planning. Even now we're recording this podcast, it's before business hours, which works fantastically well for me, right? So it doesn't conflict with my daytime responsibilities, but it does require me to be very organized, be very mindful of lunch breaks and other breaks. And of course, a lot of times the work happens after hours or on weekends or holidays. So time blocking is something that's been very helpful for me. And we talked about that in the beginning. I'm not doing this by myself. I have a team of people that I work with, and specifically for these properties being out of state, we have boots on the ground folks who are able to go and visit the assets. So I don't have to make those trips very frequently. So the power of team is something that also comes into play and has been helpful in terms of time management and running those in parallel.
Makes sense. So, at the right time, I guess, right? When the cards fall in place. Going back to something you said earlier, which has really piqued my curiosity. I actually wanted to ask that, and my brain waves got mixed up and I asked the other one first, which would have made more sense. But that happens sometimes. You were talking about underwriting 200 properties to find that one that you actually ended up closing on or even made sense. Mm-hmm. How are you going about finding those deals? Because this is something I hear from a lot of people who are starting out. Like they don't even know where to look to find those deals to underwrite. I mean, were you going directly to brokers or were you finding them in other sources? And if so, where?
Mm-hmm. I think that's the power of focus is where that comes into play. So very early in my journey, I decided to focus on a market, in that case, Florida, because I already had some presence there and skill set, that's underwriting. And once I made that decision, I went all in. Specifically in my market, around 92 to 93% of the deals are sourced through brokers. And since I still have my W-2 job, I decided to focus on the 92% of the market versus going direct to owner, which represents the remainder. From there on, I didn't necessarily have pre-existing relationships. So I did what a lot of people would do is starting to look at deals on LoopNet and Crexi and a lot of these public sites. And from there, establishing connections with brokers. When I looked at a deal or analyzed the deal, I would always make an effort to respond back with feedback on why it did or didn't work. And over time, that allowed me to start building relationships with those brokers. So of course, beyond that, meetups and other social forums, conferences also help solidify some of these relationships. So it happened. It did take some time. It didn't happen overnight, but that's the path I chose to follow, and eventually was able to get on the various distribution lists and napkin lists and and all of that. And that's how it got started.
Okay, fair enough. You got to go the way that works, right? You don't have to create a new path. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I'm just curious because I find obviously finding brokers and, not having an established relationship, it does take time, right? To get in front of the right brokers and obviously to prove yourself. And that can be very difficult barrier to entry for a lot of people. So, figured, hey, why not ask and, see if there are some other ways that you can find, off market or direct to owner and things like that. But if in the market that you're looking in, that's not really the way things happen, the way things go. You gotta do it the right way.
Absolutely. And then for the syndication, I will say it's outside of my core market, but how I found that deal or got into the deal was by finding a way to add value to others. So I didn't source that particular deal, but I was able to help one of the GPs with underwriting and vetting the deal and being that second set of eyes, and eventually did a few other things for the team. But that's how it got started, and that's how I ultimately got invited to join. So finding a way to add value to others can be another creative way to get into a deal team and find a good deal outside of your core market.
Makes sense. Great advice. What would be, speaking of which, what would be one piece of advice you would say to someone who may be similar to you, right? Someone who's working a W-2 job, maybe owns a couple residential properties, looking to get into their first multifamily deal, not just as a passive investor, which you started out with, but also as a full-time, going as a syndicator or doing deals on your own.
Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing is the power of focus. Know what you want, what your investment criteria and goals are. Know why, because that why will pull you up during tough times and propel you further during great times. And once you know that, is take action. Keep in mind that things may not happen overnight. They might, but in most cases, it does take some time. Real estate is a long-term game. Things don't happen overnight, but don't give up. Just be persistent, consistent, follow that path, and success will inevitably follow.
To me is golden advice right there. We will cut that clip out and share that because that's quintessential wise advice coming from Vessi right there. So we'll call that Vessi advice, I guess, for whatever. Hashtag Vessi advice. Vessi, I want to transition now. We call the final four. So these are four questions I ask all my guests. And first question to you is going to be, what's the worst job that you ever had?
That reminds me of probably the toughest job. When I first came to the United States as a student, I had the ability to work up to 20 hours a week. And I found a job on campus to effectively be like a receptionist or front desk operator for one of the residential halls. There were a couple of options, and one of those was to work the night shift. So it was paying a little bit more. So I did that one night shift, but it was so hard to stay awake. And admittedly, I didn't do that again, but it was tough to keep at it. So I pretty quickly figured out what my tolerance level is at that point of time and transitioned to something else after. But
Sure. Yeah, especially as a student, it's very difficult to keep work night and also function well and learn well during the day. That's for sure. Second question, what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
There's so many that come to mind, but I will speak to one of the first books I read that eventually also got me into real estate, and that's Think and Grow Rich. And unlike the title suggests, it's not about physical riches only, but it's really about the power of mindset and energy and creating a rich and abundant life. I reread this book actually at least once a year, and it just charges me with a lot of energy and kind of reminds me of what's important.
It's such a great book. Classic. So we'll make sure to put that in the show notes. It's been mentioned a few times before, and just a really great one to not just read, but reread. I think a lot of the principles in that book are universal principles and fundamentals that everyone really needs in life. Think and Grow Rich. Some other things in the book are a little bit, out there,
Yes.
but yeah, I mean, absolutely. Definitely a classic one. Third question, what's a skill or talent that you would like to learn?
This may sound a little odd, but I like learning foreign languages. I speak about 5 already, but I'd like to learn more. And so I have Portuguese and Japanese on my list. So maybe one day when I quote unquote retire, I will pick those up as well.
Wow. Which do you currently speak besides English?
Besides English and besides Bulgarian, German, Russian, and Spanish.
Wow. And I'm sure those are very useful to your job, right? I mean, as an international kind of lender, I'm sure that's what you're dealing with a lot.
Comes in very handy both at a job or when you travel or even connecting with people, because language is also about understanding the culture and mindset. And I think that has created or enriched my own mindset or worldview as well. So
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I totally agree with that. When you learn a language, and not just from a textbook, you learn more about the culture and about the mindset and how people think. That's pretty awesome. That's amazing. Okay, well, good for you. Keep it up. The more, the merrier. And fourth and final question, what does success mean to you?
Success to me means living an abundant life of no regrets. Being able to add value to others, help value to others is how you leave a legacy. And we do live a short life, so seize the day, as some people would say. Take action, go after your dreams, because we have today and tomorrow is not guaranteed, but each one have a skill and talent, and putting those into production to help others is what drives a lot of joy for me.
Awesome. Wow, that's such a great perspective on success. And I think that's really what it's all about in the end of the day. So this has really been a pleasure. It flew by as always, but Vessi, it's really been great catching up with you, and so happy you're able to join me on the show. And where can our listeners find you or reach out to you if they want?
The easiest way to connect with me is through my site, www.dbacapitalgroup.com. D as in dream, B as in believe, A as in achieve. My contact information, phone and email is there, as well as a link to my personal calendar if people would like to schedule a call. And under the insights section, I create a lot of free content, educational content for people, including most recently the release of my first digital book, The Busy Professional's Quick Guide to Investing in Multifamily, which is really intended to empower and educate investors in their journey.
Awesome. That's awesome. So we'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes, the Busy Professional's Guide to Multifamily Investing. I probably didn't say that right, but it's good enough. I'm curious, though, we didn't cover before, but the DBA Capital Group, that's your company, right? And that stands for Dream, Believe, Achieve. Is that where it comes from?
Yes, the full name is actually
awesome.
Dream, Believe, Achieve Capital Group, but I abbreviate it for website purposes.
No, that's awesome. I love it. Love it. DBA, Dream, Believe, Achieve. Well, guys, you heard it here first. Really great to have you on the show again, Vessi. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Yona. It was a pleasure to be here.
And to our listeners, thank you guys for listening all the way to the end once again. And remember, until next time, the best advice comes only when you ask.
Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn, send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.